Olá pessoal, tudo bem com vocês? Eu sou o Osvaldo aqui do canal Alma Cebosa e hoje vocês vão assistir uma entrevista, se não acho que uma das últimas entrevistas do famoso serial killer Ted Bundy, americano, que aí ao longo da sua carreira matou aí dezenas de mulheres, né? Tornou-se famoso por ser tido como uma pessoa bonita, né? Inclusive tem uma série com o Zac Efron na Netflix, né? A qual retrata aí a vida desse cara, né? Tido como um grande, diria, com uma incrível eloquência, né? Ou seja, o cara que sabia falar. Então, assim, ele tinha essa eloquência, essa tranquilidade, vocês vão perceber isso durante a entrevista. Espero que vocês assistam do início ao fim, né, essa entrevista com que ele se comunica, ou seja, um psicopata de primeira linha, né? O cara, assim, ele é bem tranquilo nas perguntas, nas respostas, né? Ou seja, uma coisa que a gente não pode de maneira alguma negar que é assustador, né? Ele é um cara inteligente, né? E o jeito que ele manipula a conversa, né, e se mantém ali calmo, mesmo sabendo, né, que de um jeito ou de outro ele iria morrer, é simplesmente impressionante. Então, bora pro vídeo, eu vou parando aos poucos para fazer o comentário, ok?
You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock if you don't receive another stay. What is going through your mind? What thoughts have you had in these last few days?
Well, I won't kid you to say that it's something that I feel that I am in control of or something that I've come to terms with, because I haven't. It's a moment-by-moment thing. Sometimes I feel very tranquil, and other times I don't feel tranquil at all. What's going through my mind right now is to use the minutes and hours that I have left as fruitfully as possible and see what happens. It helps to live in the moment in the essence that we use it productively. So right now I'm feeling calm, and in large part because I'm here with you.
For the record, you are guilty of killing many women and girls. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, that's true.
Ted, how did it happen? Take me back. What are the antecedents of the behavior that we've seen? So much grief, so much sorrow, so much pain for so many people. Where did it start? How did this moment come about?
That's the question of the hour, and one that not only people much more intelligent than I have been working on for years, but one that I've been working on for years and trying to understand. Is there enough time to explain it all? I don't know. I think I understand it, though. Understand what happened to me, to the extent that I can see how certain feelings and ideas.
Observe que ele é bem articulado, né? Ele é bem articulado, ele tem zero arrependimento, né? A gente percebe isso nesse olhar e nessa forma eloquente dele falar.
It developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them, certain very violent and very destructive feelings.
All right, let's go back then to those roots. First of all, you, as I understand it, were raised in what you consider to have been a healthy home.
Absolutely.
You were not physically abused, you were not sexually abused, you were not emotionally abused.
No, no way. And that's part of the tragedy of this whole situation, is because I grew up in a wonderful home with two dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church, 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. I'm not saying this was Leave It to Beaver.
It wasn't a perfect home.
No, I don't know that such a home exists, but it was a fine, solid Christian home, and nobody, I hope no one will try to take the easy way out and to try to blame or otherwise accuse my family of contributing to this, because I know, and I'm trying to tell you as honestly as I know what happened, and I think this is the message I want to get across. But as a young boy, and I mean a boy of 12, 13, certainly, that I encountered outside the home again, in the local grocery store, or the local drugstore, the softcore pornography, what people call softcore. But as I think I explained to you last night, Dr. Dobson, in an anecdote, that as young boys do, we explored the back roads and sideways and byways of our neighborhood, and oftentimes people would dump the garbage and whatever they were cleaning out of their house, and from time to time we'd come across pornographic books of a harder nature than more graphic, you might say, more explicit nature than we would encounter, let's say, in your local grocery store. And this also included such things as, let's say, detective magazines and more hardcore.
Those that involve violence.
Yes, yes, and and this is something I think I want to emphasize, is the most damaging kinds of pornography. And again, I'm talking from personal experience, hard, real personal experience. The most damaging kinds of pornography are those that involve violence and sexual violence. Because the wedding of those two forces, as I know only too well, brings about behavior that is just too terrible to describe.
Now walk me through that. What was going on in your mind at that time?
Okay, before we go any further, I think it's important to me, and that people believe what I'm saying, to tell you that I'm not blaming pornography.
Observe aí que ele tenta colocar, sempre falar de pornografia, né? Ou seja, que as pessoas gostam tanto da pornografia, né? E tem essa necessidade tão grande, né? De defender, que esquece que não existe somente a pornografia normal, penetração, sexo oral, etc. Veja que ele sempre leva por esse lado aí dessa questão, ou seja, e acaba desumaniza, ou seja, então esse é o tipo de pornografia que desumaniza, né, as mulheres e torna-se simples objetos, tipos de assassinato, é o caso aí do rapaz Ted Bundy.
I'm not saying that it caused me to go out and do certain things, and I take full responsibility for whatever I've done and all the things that I've done. That's not the question here. The question and the issue is how this kind of literature contributed and helped mold and shape.
Novamente ele coloca a culpa na literatura, né? Como se você lê um livro e você vai sair cometendo assassinatos, enfim, ou assistir um filme, ou ler uma revista de quadrinhos que o tema é violência. Será que funciona assim mesmo?
The kinds of violent behavior.
It fueled your fantasies.
Well, in the beginning it fuels this kind of thought process. Then, at a certain time, it's instrumental in what I would say crystallizing it, making into something which is almost like a separate entity inside. And at that point, you're at the verge, or I was at the verge of acting out on these kinds of thoughts.
Now, I really want to understand that. You had gone about as far as you could go in your own fantasy life with printed material, and you made or printed and video or film or
film,
photos,
magazines,
yeah.
what have you.
And then there was the urge to take that little step or big step over to a physical event.
And it happens. It happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. My experience with, I'd say, pornography generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with sexuality, is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
Veja que ele usa novamente a palavra pornografia várias vezes, ou seja, é nítido como ele tenta convencer, né, as pessoas do contrário, ou seja, fica muito claro que arrependimento algum, né, para com a vítima, para com as suas famílias, ou seja, é nítido essa questão que ele coloca aí. Ou seja, todas essas histórias, né, só nos mostra que não devemos nos deixar se levar, né, por um rostinho bonito, um bom papo. Então, confiar nesse tipo de pessoas, né? Ou seja, não coloque qualquer um dentro da sua casa. É como o próprio Ted Bundy disse, né? Que diz, abre aspas, nós serial killers, né, somos seus filhos, nós somos seus maridos, né, seus netos e assim por diante. Vamos continuar.
How long did you stay at that point before you actually assaulted someone?
Well, yeah, you see, that is a very delicate point in my own development. And we're talking about having reached the point or a gray area that surrounded that point over a course
You don't
of
remember
years.
how long that
Well,
was?
I would say a couple of years. And what I was dealing with there were very strong inhibitions against criminal behavior or violent behavior that had been conditioned into me, bred into me in my environment, in my neighborhood, in my church, in my school. Things which said, no, this is wrong. I mean, even to think of it is wrong, but certainly to do it is wrong. And I'm on that edge, and you might say, the last vestiges of restraint. The barriers to actually doing something were being tested constantly and assailed through the kind of fantasy life that was fueled largely by pornography.
Do you remember what pushed you over that edge? Do you remember the decision to go for it? Do you remember where you decided to throw caution to the wind?
Again, when you say pushed, I know what you're saying. I don't want to
Yes,
infer again.
I understand that.
That I was
point
that
is
I was
clear.
some helpless kind of a victim, and yet we're talking about an influence that is the influence of violent types of media and violent pornography, which was an indispensable link in the chain of behavior, the chain of events that led to the behaviors, to the assaults, to the murders, and what have you. It's a very difficult thing to describe. The sensation, of reaching that point where I knew that it was like something had, say, snapped, that I knew.
Percebe que ele está mesmo calmo, tranquilo, sereno, mesmo sabendo da sua morte, ele continua ali a tentar controlar a entrevista e mostrar ser uma boa pessoa. De fato, ele tem bons argumentos, poderia ter sido um bom advogado, mas enveredou pelo caminho a qual ele, né, está aqui descrevendo.
That I couldn't control it anymore. That these barriers that I had learned as a child, that had been instilled in me, were not enough to hold me back with respect to seeking out and harming somebody.
Would it be accurate to call that a frenzy, a sexual frenzy?
Well, yes, that's one way to describe it. A compulsion, a building up of this destructive energy. Another factor here that I haven't mentioned is the use of alcohol. But I think that what alcohol did, in conjunction with, let's say, my exposure to pornography, was alcohol reduced my inhibitions. At the same time, the fantasy life that was fueled by pornography eroded them further.
In the early days, you were nearly always about half drunk when you did these things. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Was that always true?
I would say that was generally the case, almost without exception.
All right, if I can understand it now, there's this battle going on within. There are the conventions that you've been...
Dá a entender que nessa entrevista ele fala assim como se fosse um coitado, né? Ou seja, dando aquela... que ele vai ali mostrando, de repente, né, quando o alarme toca, né, ele fica sério e depois continua normalmente, né? O cara realmente é um cara maluco quanto a essa questão aí Ou seja, é incrível como ele em nenhum momento esboça sentimento de arrependimento, né? Ou seja, apesar de se esforçar muito para não se sentir, ou para fingir, né, sentir algo de arrependimento e também de tristeza.
And taught there's the right and wrong that you learned as a child, and then there is this unbridled passion fueled by your plunge into hardcore violent pornography, and those things are at war with each other.
Yes.
And then with the alcohol diminishing the inhibitions, you let go.
Well, yes, and you can summarize it that way, and that's accurate, certainly. And it just occurred to me that some people would say that, well, I've seen that stuff and it doesn't do anything to me. And I can understand that. Virtually everyone can be exposed to so-called pornography, and while they're aroused to it to one degree or another, not go out and do anything wrong.
Well, addictions are like that. They affect some people more than they affect others.
Well,
but there is a percentage of people affected by hardcore pornography in a very violent way, and you're obviously one of them.
That was a major component, and I don't know why I was vulnerable to it. All I know is that it had an impact on me that was just so central to the development of the violent behavior that I engaged in.
Ted, after you committed your first murder, what was the emotional effect on you? What happened in the days after that?
Well, again, please understand that even all these years later, it's very difficult to talk about it, and reliving it through talking about it is.
Percebe que a pergunta do repórter, né, ele dá essa resposta, essa serenidade, né, no olhar aqui de uma pessoa que está satisfeita com a realização daquilo que ele se propôs a fazer, ou seja, matar mulheres e meninas.
It's difficult to say the least, but I want you to understand what happened. It was like coming out of some kind of horrible trance or dream. I can only liken it to after, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but to have been possessed by something so awful and so alien, and then the next morning wake up from it, remember what happened, and realize that basically, I mean, in the eyes of the law, certainly in the eyes of God, you're responsible. To wake up in the morning and realize what I had done, and with a clear mind and all my essential moral and ethical feelings intact at that moment, absolutely horrified that I was capable of doing something like that.
You really hadn't known that before?
There is just absolutely no way to describe, first, the brutal urge to do that kind of thing, and then what happens is once it has been more or less satisfied and recedes, you might say, or spent, that sense, that kind of energy level recedes, and basically I became myself again. I want people to understand this too, and I'm not saying this gratuitously because it's important that people understand this, that basically I was a normal person. I wasn't some guy hanging out at bars or a bum, or I wasn't a pervert in the sense that, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with him, and just tell. I mean, I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent and very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret and very close to myself and didn't let anybody know about it.
A questão é, pare de endeusar psicopatas. Essa é a grande verdade. Para quem quiser entender um pouco mais sobre esse camarada aí, tem uma série na Netflix chamada Conversa com Ted Bundy, né? Assistam, para vocês entenderem mais é melhor. Ou seja, a minha impressão é que o Ted Bundy, de forma muito fria, né, ele vai expressar todos, né, os seus atos, os seus conflitos, né, ou seja, e aí acaba as pessoas ficando confusas em relação a isso. A verdade é que todo mundo sabe que ele foi, né, um psicopata e procurou aí achar um culpado, né, para tentar aí amenizar aí, a sua culpa, né, ou seja, ele tentou aí de um modo ou de outro sempre estar achando um culpado e nunca de fato assumindo aquilo que ele fez, que é uma alma cebosa.
And part of the shock and horror from my dear friends and family years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked at me and they looked at the all-American boy, and I mean, I wasn't perfect, but I want to be quite candid with you. I was okay. I was. The basic humanity and basic spirit that God gave me was intact, but unfortunately it became overwhelmed at times. And I think people need to recognize that it's not some kind of those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families, and pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. He snatched me out of my home. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago. And as diligent as my parents were, and they were diligent in protecting their children, and as good a Christian home as we had, and we had a wonderful Christian home, there is no protection against the kinds of influences that are loose in the society that tolerates.
You feel this really?
Olha só que Ted Bundy diz: nós, serial killers, somos seus filhos, somos seus maridos, nós estamos em toda parte, né, e haverá mais de suas crianças mortas no dia de amanhã. Ou seja, você sentirá o último suspiro, deixando seus corpos, você estará olhando para eles dentro, né, dos seus olhos, segundo Ted Bundy. Continuamos.
Deeply, don't you? Ted, outside these walls right now, there are several hundred reporters that wanted to talk to you.
Yeah.
And you asked me to come here from California because you had something you wanted to say. This hour that we have together is not just an interview with a man who's scheduled to die tomorrow morning. I'm here and you're here because of this message that you're talking about right now.
Pessoal, só lembrando que o quanto a mídia, né, romantizou essa questão à época, né? Esse cara aí tinha muitas fãs, assim como muitos psicopatas brasileiros também tem muitas fãs, né? Os caras recebem centenas e milhares de cartas. Charles Manson casou na prisão, entre tantos outros, né, que também casaram na prisão após cometer dezenas de atos matando mulheres, né? E acabam recebendo aí muitas cartas na cadeia. É impossível, né? Mas a gente já poder acreditar nisso, mas temos que acreditar porque é fato, é verdadeiro, né? Então, assim, só lembrando que para esta alma cebosa, toda a dor e todo o sofrimento na hora da morte, com certeza foi pouco pelo que ele fez, né? E pelo não arrependimento, né, para com as suas vítimas, nem tão pouco com a dor das suas famílias.
Here. You really feel that hardcore pornography and the doorway to it, softcore pornography, is doing untold damage to other people and causing other women to be abused and killed the way you did others.
Listen, I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now.
Bom, você acabou de assistir toda a entrevista, né? Tem 17 minutos e pouco, mas você pode buscar aí, né, em outros vídeos, em outras plataformas, como eu falei, da Netflix, Lá tem um material mais completo. Isso aqui é uma entrevista e eu quis fazer essa reação para o canal Alma Cebosa. Então, apresentei aqui Ted Bundy, né, a última entrevista, uma alma cebosa que ceifou aí dezenas de vidas de mulheres e meninas e nunca demonstrou nenhum tipo de arrependimento enquanto fez isso, e nem tampouco durante essa entrevista, né, ele muitas vezes defendeu a si mesmo, né, por isso que ele, né, poderia ser um bom advogado se tivesse trilhado pelo bom caminho. Mas não, eis aí uma alma cebosa que com certeza está no inferno. Se você curtiu, deixa o seu like, inscreva-se neste canal, compartilha, né? Principalmente deixa o seu like para o YouTube entender a relevância deste vídeo, ou seja, reagindo à entrevista de Ted Bundy. É isso. Vejo vocês no próximo vídeo aí. Tchau.